When I first started working at Distilled, one of the first tasks that I was assigned was to try and win featured snippets for one of our clients. I was completely new to SEO, so I really thought this was going to be my chance to prove myself, and I spent a lot of time reading all the best practice ways that you could win featured snippets. I was watching videos from conferences, and my manager thought that he had just given me a very simple task. Really, what he had given me was a quest to become my SEO talk at Brighton, and I would become the featured snippet master at Distilled. That didn't really happen. I actually ended up hating these things. Izzy calls them sexy. I don't agree. And I'm going to talk about that and my journey into hating featured snippets and how I developed a personal vendetta against them. I'm then going to cover some of the existing research out there and some problems that I have with these studies and why this led me to conducting my own study. And then I'm going to present my findings to you at the very end. I'm going to give you some actions that you can take with you on Monday morning to implement some of this research. So first, though, Izzy already touched on this, but for those of you that don't know, what is a featured snippet? A featured snippet is this little box that appears at the top of a search query on Google when you ask a question. So why do cats love catnip? Apparently, it stimulates their pheromone receptors, and it gives them an overwhelming sense of euphoria and happiness. We can get a bit meta about this as well. We can ask Google, what is a featured snippet? According to Google, a featured snippet is this box that sometimes they put at the top of a search query. It will include an answer to the question that is scraped from the web page, the page title, and a link to that thing. So why do people love these things so much? What's with the craze? Why do people love featured snippets? The obvious answer is that they go right to the top of the search results, so you can get position 0, as some people call it. The other thing is users love them. They answer users' queries very quickly. And also, they increase brand awareness. So knowing all of that, going back to my first attempt at trying to win featured snippets, I, again, took a very best practice approach on this time around, so my process looks something like this. First, I went into Stat, which is my rank tracking tool of choice for this. They have a great SERP features tab that you can use, and I got a list of keywords that my client ranked for that had featured snippets on them. And on the ones that they didn't have featured snippets, I made recommendations for how I thought they could maybe win them. These were things like including the keyword in the heading. So if I wanted to try and win the featured snippet from Pretty Providence here for the query, how to build a blanket fort, and I worked at BuzzFeed, I don't, but BuzzFeed ranks number 3 here, and I'd look at my page and see, oh, we don't have the keyword in this title, so I might change it to something like this. Also, according to best practice for how-to queries, Google prefers those to be in a list format, like here. So how to catch a leprechaun. Wiki currently owns this featured snippet. If I wanted to try and steal this and I was Martha Stewart, ranking number 5, I'd notice that all our content is locked up in this slideshow. So I'd say to my client, maybe you should pull this out, put it in a list, and you might win that featured snippet. One of my other recommendations, a lot of the queries that my client was trying to target were transactional and how much does X cost type queries. So for these, Google prefers a table. So College Board has the featured snippet here for how much is college tuition. It's too much. And on their webpage, if you go, you can see they have this nice table. So I said, okay, for these queries, maybe you should put it in a table. I wrap all this up, deliver it to my manager, and I'm convinced this is going to be my masterpiece. Right now, there's probably a couple questions on your mind. First, is this just a talk about winning featured snippets? Because I didn't really sign up for this. No, that's not what this is. I'm telling a story, as Kelvin mentioned, to introduce my research. And the next question you might have is, did any of these tactics even work? I don't know, because about a week later, Google updates and takes the featured snippets away from every single query that I put a recommendation on for. So lesson number 1, Google here is the enemy. That's okay, though. About a week later, different client comes to the same manager and asks for the same task. So he comes to me, naturally, the budding featured snippet master at Distilled, and asks Emily, are you willing to do this again? And I say, yes, of course. This time I decide I'm going to one-up Google a bit, and I'm going to focus more on my competitors instead. Instead of just following best practice, I'm going to look, what is the current owner doing that maybe we're not doing? So I ask questions like, are they answering the query better than us? Are they satisfying the user intent? What format are they using? Maybe actually they're answering a how-to question with a paragraph, and Google seems to like that here. Or things like, are they using headings when we're not? Are they flagging up that content better than we are? I'm taking quite a lot of time with this, so my manager's like, Emily, come on, it's just a featured snippets task. And so I have one more keyword left that I want to make a recommendation on. And I'm looking, and the only thing that I can see is different is they have a different H1 than us, but similar content. So I use the oldest SEO trick in the book, and I copy and paste that, put it in my recommendation, and tell our client, use this one instead. That is the thing that works. After about 35 hours of trying to win featured snippets, the one lazy little thing that I do wins. At this point, I'm frustrated. I've wasted so much time, and I decide I have a new lesson from this. Featured snippets are bullshit. And there's plenty of reason to think this, right? Izzy touched on some of this. Rand Fishkin talks about this. What's not to like about featured snippets? First, they steal clicks like every other SERP feature out there. There's this study from Ahrefs. They use their clickstream data for this. And they say, first, featured snippets are reducing click-through rates. So in SERP queries without a featured snippet, about 26% are going to the top ranking URL. This is compared to about 19.8% on a query where there is a featured snippet. Now, if you have the featured snippet and are ranking #1, great, but a lot of people aren't doing that. The next thing they show you is it's also increasing the number of no-click searches. So about 25.8% of queries without a featured snippet result in no-click compared to 29.8% with a featured snippet. The next thing is that featured snippets create confirmation bias. So when I was about 8 years old, I really wanted a bearded dragon, which is a type of lizard. And my parents were trying to tell me this was a bad idea, so I thought I was going to go on Google, if it was the thing that I did when I was 8, and I could ask a question like this: are reptiles good pets? And I'd say, yes, Mom and Dad, they're great pets. They're docile, they're low maintenance, I should definitely get a bearded dragon. They could ask a similar but differently phrased question to Google, and they could say, are reptiles bad pets? And they'd say, look, Emily, they're just like every other pet. You're 8, you're not going to take care of this. And actually, that's exactly what happened. My parents took care of the bearded dragons for me. But the point here is, they're creating confirmation bias, and we can see this across the web. The last thing about featured snippets that I hate is that they're really unsophisticated. So this example that I showed you earlier, where I was able to copy and paste the H1 to steal it, is one example. Another example, if you haven't picked up already, I'm American, and Mother's Day is actually coming up for us soon. So imagine I wasn't so great at coming up with a query, and I asked something like this: what's a Mother's Day message? For your sister or friend? Right, so this content isn't really being vetted. A bit more of an extreme example of this is, I think everyone has a preferred method that they use to try and get rid of hiccups. Mine is to plug my ears and nose at the same time, hold my breath for 10 seconds, and hope they go away. Google, have an orgasm, or better yet, get a rectal massage. So at this point, I decide I'm going to set out to prove that these things are overrated. I'm going to be an SEO thought leader. I'm going to do my own research, and I'm going to say, you know what, featured snippets aren't so great after all. So the first thing I do is I go and I see what existing research is out there, and I see this study from HubSpot that says featured snippets increase their click-through rate by over 114%. Okay. Next, I see featured snippets increased snippets by 516%. Blog posts on search engine land. But luckily, all of these studies suck. Sorry if anyone that wrote these is in the audience. We can talk afterwards. But the issues that I have with these studies: first, they use misleading wording. So in the case of HubSpot, they're using relative instead of absolute increase to report percentages. So click-through rate for high-volume keywords increased by over 114%. I can say that I found people that don't eat ice cream have about a 0.1% chance of committing murder. People that do eat ice cream have a 0.2% chance of committing murder. If you eat ice cream, that's 100% more likely that you're going to commit a murder. So good reporting going on here. There's also misleading headlines. So they make it sound like they want a featured snippet and then their click-through rate went up by 114%. Actually, if you look at this study, they're comparing pages of theirs that have a featured snippet to those that don't. And they're saying in the high volume bracket, they saw about a 20% difference in click-through rate. So This isn't exactly what happened. There's lots of reasons why a page optimized for featured snippets is getting more clicks. Other thing is there was no experiment control. So back to HubSpot, they included low-volume search keywords in their queries, which are susceptible to click-through rates that are distorted. 4 impressions, 2 clicks, 50% click-through rate. If we go back to the blog post on Search Engine Land, they show you this graph, and they say, we had this page, we did lots of changes to it, we do nothing after February. The only difference is we win a featured snippet in June, and we saw a 516% increase. One thing to point out is this graph is going up before they even win the featured snippet, so you can't just attribute it to that. Next, you have this graph that says their position was actually increasing throughout this whole time period as well. And also, this page never ranked above position 4. If you're going from position 6 to position 0, yes, you're going to see quite a dramatic increase. The only important thing about this was it meant I was back in business. So I decided I was going to create my own study, and this was my research method. First, my hypothesis was that owning a featured snippet does not improve click-through rates significantly. The way that I set out to prove this was I used data from Stat. I got a range of keywords across different clients of ours. I found pages where they had instances of both owning a featured snippet and not, and I reported the base rank of that page. Now, base rank is where they're ranking without including SERP features, so it's consistent. I combined this with Google Search Console data to get the click-through rate on that day, and I only included queries with impressions greater than 60. I had 3,834 data points by the end of this. Now, I want you to forget everything everyone's told you about featured snippets, because this is what I found. Featured snippets improve click-through rates for every single organic position. So I didn't manage to prove that these things don't work, but I had a very strong bias, so it's good research. We can see this here. So on the x-axis, we have the click-through rate. On the y-axis, we have the organic position. Blue bubbles are when they own the featured snippet. Red bubbles are when they didn't. So blue bubbles always higher than red bubbles for every single organic position. The other thing this graph tells me is that position 4 and higher were more likely to own them. So we can see this because the blue bubbles are concentrated in this top left-hand corner. And the reason I bring this up is HubSpot also said 18% of their pages ranking in position 1 owned a featured snippet. This was compared to 28% in position 5. And their claim based off this is ranking in the top 5 results, it means backlinks and other authority signals don't matter that much for winning a featured snippet. I didn't find this to be true in my study. Average rank of pages in my study that owned a featured snippet was 2.1. Those without was 3.3. The last thing in this bubble chart, if you're ranking below 10, a lot of people already know this, but you're unlikely to own a featured snippet. Now, another thing I wanted to explore was this claim that they had a 20% increase in their click-through rate by owning a featured snippet. And I did a similar thing. So I took, in my study, I did the difference between the pages that had a featured snippet and didn't, and I graphed the average for each position. This is what I saw. So the highest that I saw was in position 4, and that was just over 6% improvement in click-through rate. Now, that's great, but it's not anywhere near 20%. This is including very high volume keywords across a range of industries. Now, if I wanted to filter this down to just one of our clients, which had the most data that I had, so this is more similar to what the HubSpot study was like, this gets a bit more dramatic. But you can see that in position 5, this is where I saw the biggest increase in click-through rate, and that was still only 10%. So these studies are really inflating that gain. But the conclusion remains the same. Featured snippets work. So I still hate featured snippets. Going back to Rand's, Fishkin's talk, I don't think they're much different from other SERP features. Lots of other people, and everyone's really excited about them, and I think it's distracting us from the problem. But they do improve traffic, and you're all here today to do that. So how are we going to use this information to help ourselves and our clients win some featured snippets? Here's some Monday morning actions for you. This is based off my own experience and also experience of other colleagues of mine at Distilled. So first thing you're going to have to do, you're going to have to generate a list of keywords that you rank for that have featured snippets on them. As I mentioned, I use Stat for this. You can also use Moz, SEO Monitor. There's plenty of tools that will do this. I would avoid keywords with commercial intent. Izzy referred to this as transactional intent, and the reason I say this is in the first example I talked about, Google updated and took these featured snippets away on these queries, and I found in my study a lot of times these were getting swapped out for Google Shopping results, local packs, things like that. I'd also flag where you're ranking higher than the current owner. As I mentioned, if you are ranking higher, you're more likely to be able to win a featured snippet, so there's a good chance that you can steal that one. I'd look for low-hanging fruit. So again, I was able to just copy and paste an H1, and I won a featured snippet. Another example from a colleague of mine or a couple colleagues of mine at Distilled, they joined 2 points together with the word however. Now, what I mean by this is they noticed that the current featured snippet owner was owning it, but Google was bringing 2 parts of their page together. So they have one side of the argument. Apparently, Google's caught on to this confirmation bias thing, so they're trying to fix it. But so they have one argument at the top of the page, a different at the bottom. Google brought that together with an ellipses, ... What my colleagues did is they answered the question with the same 2 arguments, but they said, first argument, however, second, and they were able to steal that featured snippet. So that's something you can look out for. If you have pages that are performing really well and you don't have content on them at the moment, I would add content on that to target featured snippets. We've seen this again at Distilled, and we've been able to win featured snippets very quickly on these pages, and they've seen upwards of 24% increase in organic sessions from that on estimate. So make sure that you're targeting these things if you have pages that are relevant for them. Last tip that I have for you is to reformat your content into that matches the current owner. So this is saying like turning paragraph answers into lists, turning tables, listen to tables, sorry, etc., that sort of thing. I'll let you, I see people taking pictures, so I also have this on SlideShare. You can get all these after. So I started this talk and I said, I set out to become the featured snippet master at Distilled. And I wanted to do this by proving that they were bullshit, and I really failed miserably at that. But I am standing here today on the main stage at BrightonSEO, so I would say I succeeded in that task. Thank you.